Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today is Monday, and we're continuing on in our first unit, Preparing for Ethics. It is June 15th, and today we're going to be talking about the Levinas reading. That is an excerpt from his book, Totality and Infinity. If you haven't clicked on the lecture notes that I've uploaded yet, please do so and listen to the song that comes before this lecture. And while you're doing that, just try to listen to how the song is related to what I'm going to be talking about today. So, like I said, we're continuing on with the first unit, Preparing for Ethics, having talked about kind of what humans are like and personal identity stuff with Jung. Uh, we're transitioning now to talking about persons or people that exist outside and independently of us. Um, so we're going to be looking at the philosophy of Emanuel Levinas, who was born in 1875 and died in 1961. So he was also writing during the beginning of the 20th century. He's a French philosopher of Jewish heritage, and he helped popularize the concept of the other, which we're going to be talking about today. Some of his famous ideas uh, are this ethical theory that we're going to be talking about today, and more specifically, uh, just kind of the stance that we should or can take towards other people before we begin doing ethics. Um, and how this is going to show up in is what we presume other people to be, uh, or rather, of presuming what others are like or what they'll do altogether. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. I had you read the introduction to his book, which was written by a philosopher named John Wilde, as well as the preface to Totality Infinity. If the preface didn't make any sense, don't worry about it. It didn't make a lot of sense to me either. But I think the introduction itself is probably a pretty good summary of what Levinas is trying to do in this book. And we're not going to read the whole book, but I think these first two sections are really good for help grounding examining and applying ethical theories that we have coming up in the next two units. So just some background on what Levinas is doing in this book before we start. He's kind of drawing on different philosophical movements that were popular at the time, namely phenomenology, which is the study of perception. What does it mean to perceive something? Uh, how does perception work? What is perception? Uh, that's phenomenology. So Levinas is going to be pulling some concepts and themes from that field, as well as the field of existentialism, which I like to basically describe as the field of philosophy that tries to deal with the big questions. Uh, Really, what existentialism does is it tries to understand and provide answers to the big questions from the point of view of humans. So, do we have a purpose in our lives? Is there a God? Do we have free will? These are questions that existentialism is concerned with, and you're going to see Levinas draw on some of these questions and ideas as I go through this lecture here. Basically, what Levinas is going to be doing here in this book, or at least a part of this book, is going to be trying to describe to us what our experience of the world and life is like at the beginning stages. So when we're born and we come into this world, uh, how do we understand the world? How do we view the world? And how do those early experiences structure how we treat others later and uh, what we think about other people and what we think about the world more generally as we grow up? This is kind of also what we're going to be talking about today. So let's just go ahead and kind of explain what Levinas says our primary experience of the world is. So if we're born into this world and we're starting to see things, we're starting to perceive things, we don't really know what's going on yet. Um, Levinas says that each of us, first and foremost, finds ourselves existing in a universe with alien things and elements. In other words, we find ourselves existing in a world, in a universe, in which there are things that exist independently of us, like this hacky sack. If I were to die right now or something, this hacky sack would still be around, and this hacky sack is not part of me, it's something else that exists independently of me. Same thing with like chapstick, everything that isn't you, uh, we kind of take a certain viewpoint towards. Initially, our understanding of the world, that is egocentric and kind of selfish, right? And you see this with babies. When they're born into the world, they don't give a damn about what anybody else thinks. They're trying to meet their own needs and desires, right? They're trying to communicate with us so that they can get what they want. That's how all of us enter the world, and that's initially how we experience the world. We understand ourselves to take precedence over everything else that exists externally to us, right? I'm more important than this blanket. Um, I use this chapstick for myself, for my own goals and ends and things. This is how we primarily view the world. The next step that we take, Levinas says, is as we continue to interact with things in our environment and as we recognize that we take precedence over those things, we begin to see the things that exist externally to us as tools, things that we can use to help fulfill our desires, meet our own ends, stuff like that. So we initially see the things that exist externally to us as tools, and we treat them as such, right? We exert our control over these things. We see them as objects, and we treat them like objects. And we use these things to meet our own ends and stuff like that. Initially, there's no problem with this. This is fine, right? This is how everybody understands the world initially. This is how everybody interacts with the world initially, at least before meeting other people. The problem that Levinas is going to focus in on in this book is that our tendency is to extend this view of objects and the world to other people as well, at least before we start to get to know them and spend more time with them. That is, we see other people, other humans, initially as tools too, like inanimate objects that we can use for our own desires or purposes, or we see them as extensions of ourself, uh, in which they are basically the same as us, and we can kind of understand them and know what they're thinking and know what they're going to do. But as we're going to see, and as you should know from reading the introduction to this work, Levinas is going to say this view is fundamentally mistaken. We can't presume really to know anything about anyone else before we meet them and begin talking and communicating with them. This is where the relation of self to other comes in this unit and in ethics. Keep it in the back of your mind as we kind of move forward. The relation of self to other, I think, was popularized by Hegel in either the late 1700s or the early 1800s. Basically, this is how it is cashed out. We talked about the nature of the self in the first two lectures. That is what you are, who you are, what your self is. You is the self. Everything that is not you, everything that exists independently of you, or that isn't a part of you, that is what Hegel and what Levinas is going to call other. So you are this thing right here, and everything else is basically other. What's interesting about this way of breaking down the world is that there are fundamental differences between self and other, right? For example, just look at this hacky sack again. It looks different than I am, right? It looks different than me. It has different properties. It behaves differently under physical laws and things like that. It's not a person, right? We wouldn't say this hacky sack is a person. It doesn't experience things or feel emotions. And even if we even if we take as the object of our analysis another person, um, there still are fundamental differences between who I am as a person and who they are as a person. And it's not immediately apparent how I and the other are related or connected, if at all. There's always going to be some distance between myself and the other insofar as we are two fundamentally different things existing in this universe, right? Like I said before, initially, when we interact or make contact with another person, we might think that the other with whom we come into contact with is an alter ego. That is, someone that is basically like me, that shares my worldview, that has the same properties of me and the same way of understanding the world. But again, we can't assume that, actually. And one of the fundamental reasons for this is that whenever we're dealing with another subjective entity, another person or an animal or something like that, we cannot get inside their head. Their experience is their own, and my experience is my own. I can try to explain to you what my experience has been like, but I'm never going to be able to completely tell you what it's like, because in order to know what my experience is like, you'd have to feel that experience. But you can't, right? You're confined to your way of viewing the world and interacting with the world. That is, how you understand the world is filtered through your lens of personal experience, and how I view and interact with the world is filtered through my lens of personal experience and my own personal beliefs and desires and things like this. A quote from John Wilde, I think, that sums up this nicely is, "The other is far from me and other than myself, a stranger, and I cannot be sure of what this strangeness may conceal." We can't make any assumptions about what people are like before we communicate with them and before they express to us, uh, through their lens of personal experience, how they see the world and how they feel about certain things. All of this is going to be intimately related to ethics and the ethical theories that we're going to look at moving forward. Insofar as my personal experience is mine and your personal experience is yours, there's always going to remain some distance between us. I'm never going to know what it's going to be like to be you. You're never going to know what it's like to be me exactly, fully. For Levinas, the question of ethics is, and this is why I've put this in the preparing for ethics unit, how can I coexist with the other and leave his otherness intact? In other words, how can we begin to interact ethically with other people without jeopardizing or infringing on their freedom and their own personal autonomy? That's the question that Levinas is going to try to answer in this book. His answer, the long short of it, is basically language. Meaningful, open, unassuming conversation that really attempts to listen to the other person. That's how we're going to understand the other best and understand what the other wants, how the other sees the world, and the kinds of personal experiences that the other has had. We cannot know the other and his worldview or experiences without really talking to him. That's our best vehicle of communication and personal expression, Levinas thinks. It's dangerous to begin talking to someone and start throwing labels on them in your mind. You know, you're having a political discussion with someone and you're like, okay, they said this, they're a liberal. Okay, they said this, they're pro-choice. Okay, they said this, they don't like capitalism or whatever, they're anti-capitalist. We need to resist the tendency to do that, both when we are coming to meet a person for the same time and as we continually engage with people. Because trying to fit the other within our categories, labels, or simplified views of understanding the world uh, is not respectful, really, to how they understand and interact with the world. Um, this is again because as we understand and act within the world, it is colored by our own personal experiences, beliefs, and desires. Similarly, how the other views and interacts in the world is going to be colored by their personal experiences, beliefs, and desires, to which I do not have access to unless I talk with them about that. Another reason why uh, trying to fit the other within certain categories so we can feel like we understand them better, or slapping certain labels on them isn't a good way of going about engaging ethically with them, is because what we have seen throughout history is that typically the dominant understanding uh, of the world, the way that the majority of humans understand the world in any given society, uh, is generally a product of a certain set of historical contexts and those in positions of power who have the ability to kind of mold the narrative, whether they're doing it consciously or unconsciously, right? It is the dominant culture that sets the narrative. This is why we in the United States privilege, like I said in the last lecture, rationality and reason and logic above emotion and intuition and feeling and stuff like this. It's a product of our Western European Enlightenment scientific tradition to view the world like that. And if we see someone on the street who's like, science doesn't really know anything, science gets it wrong, I don't believe in science, our typical way to interact with that person is to say, you're just wrong, buddy. You don't really understand the world. Science does get it. You know, you just don't really know what's going on. And so the dominant culture plays a more formative role in constructing and uh, what's the word? Uh, Constructing and supporting the current narrative than any other group. And this isn't like I'm not being conspiratorial here. You know, we are all reflections of the society in which we live and the societies and cultural traditions that we came from. It's just kind of a descriptive fact. I'm just describing how the world works. That what gets picked up as the best way to understand the world is the one that most people believe in and the one that most people are talking about. The problem with having this, the problem with taking what the majority of uh, society thinks on as true is that it excludes a fundamental aspect of reality, and that's that we all have our own personal experiences and views and understandings of the world that might not necessarily be in contradiction with what the dominant culture or a particular social group is saying, right? How we The experiences that we've had, the desires and beliefs that we have, do affect how we understand the world. And so, kind of saying that the dominant culture has it right, this is the one true objective way at looking at the world and understanding the world, and all other explanations are wrong, um, is just extremely presumptuous, I think, and it's not really sensitive to the historical causes of why one worldview wins out over another, right? You've heard the phrase, uh, history is written by the victors. That is broadly true, I think. So when we try to take our ways of understanding the world and fit someone into that way of understanding the world, we kind of neglect their ability to engage in free thought and action, and we kind of reduce their subjectivity in a sense. Whenever we confront the other or talk with the other or try to understand the other, we need to realize that the other is always more than they seem to us. The other is not going to be reducible to the way that we personally understand and act within the world, simply because they're a different person with a different understanding of the world than I am. Short and sweet, short and simple. What we should try to do as we move forward and try to pinpoint what it means to live ethically and what an ethical life looks like, we should strive to maintain and respect our own integrity and freedom, as well as the integrity of the other. We should not try to fit them within our oversimplified worldviews. We should talk with them and listen to them and have meaningful conversation with them. We should not seek to exert power or control over them. That doesn't seem right. Uh, we should rather seek to foster creativity and freedom for all people. Um, I think that is generally a good stance to have and a good stance to come to as we prepare for engaging in ethics. We must speak and act uh, to ourselves and to the other from charity. We should presume the best about them, at least initially, not the worst of people. We shouldn't assume someone is our enemy just because they are on a different side of the political aisle as us, or they have a different religion than us. We should not assume that people are stupid if they don't have the same worldview that we do, or if they didn't come to the same conclusion that we did. Uh, Really, what I think Levinas is saying here is that if we're going to construct an ethic, if we're going to live ethical lives, we need to start engaging and making contact with the other from a space of charity uh, and love, and with a willingness to really listen to them, not merely hear the words that they are saying. So I think that's a pretty good summary of what Levinas has going on here. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to shoot me an email. But until then, I will see you on Wednesday for our hooks and origami readings. Okay, have a great day.